So the 20s are a really cool time period in American history. So a lot is going on. A lot is going on in the cities. Not a whole heck of a lot is going on in the South. And so, when I say the 20s, like what comes to mind to you? Great Gatsby, right? What else? Alcohol, yeah, like the speakeasies and prohibition and all this. What else? You what? Oh wow. All right. The what? Oh, I don't know. I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what it was. What else? What else? Parties. Okay, cool. So that's what we're going to kind of look at over the next several days or couple days is all these individuals and what do they contribute to the 20s. And so that's kind of our central question is looking at these different individuals on these big cheeses, right? The big cheese means important individuals. So what did they brought to the 20s? How did they shape 20s culture? And so we're going to kind of look at some different things, different people. So out of the progressive era, slowly but surely, we're starting to see some changes in working conditions. A lot of companies are starting to raise their pay. And so Henry Ford, and I talked about him a couple times, he really starts to set the precedent for good working conditions because he realized if you pay people well and you don't make them work 70 hours a week and you have nice working conditions, then people don't mind coming to work. And if people don't mind coming to work or they even like their job, then chances are their production and their work ethic is going to be that much better. And so he would send people down to the South to recruit workers. He started raising his wages. So his workers only worked 8 hours a day and they were paid $5 a day. That was like double, sometimes triple any other factory in the world. So great working wages, great working hours. So if you do that, what are you also, if you treat your workers well, what else is going to keep happening if you treat them well? You're going to get more of them so you can expand, so your production is going to skyrocket. What else? Are they going to quit? Are they going to leave? Are they going to strike? Yeah, they're going to stay. Like you've got good, consistent work. And so because of that, because you have good, consistent work, you can open more factories. And so that started happening. His production skyrockets during the 20s. And so the cost of a Model T goes from like $800 to like $275 because he had such great production. So he is really starting to set the precedent for better working conditions, better wages, better working hours. Okay. So because of that, and so because we're starting to see better working conditions, more wages, people start having disposable income. What is disposable income? Money you can like have that's left over extra from all your bills, right? Like as an adult, you get paid and then you pay all your bills, and then that little bitty amount of money that's left on the tail end, you can buy stuff. You can buy stuff. And so the 20s is kind of that start of people can buy stuff. People can go on vacations. People can buy radios and washing machines and cars. And so this is kind of the beginning of a consumer society. So during, the Gilded Age and the Progressive era, people are just working to live, right? You make money, you pay for your crappy tenement apartment, and you just work to the next paycheck, right? You're just living paycheck to paycheck. And so during the 20s, because wages are starting to increase a little bit, not a whole heck of a lot, but they're starting to increase, people had disposable income. People could go on vacations. So with airplanes starting during World War I, they kind of turned into the consumer side. And so the airline industry was born during the 20s. So people could fly to destinations. People could fly to go on different vacations. And so this is creating a whole new market. So that boom in the economy that's coming out of the war, because women are working in the factories, men are working for the army, so people have money. So to take that boom from the war and it continues afterwards, because if people have money, what do? Typically, they spend it. So if you continue this kind of consumer society with people spending more money, you're expanding the economy. So the economy is expanding, which is going to cause a problem. Okay? Credit is also born during the 1920s. So this whole wonderful idea of buy now and pay later. That is such a great idea, right? So buy now, pay later. So a lot of people started borrowing money from the banks to buy a car, to buy a home. They're taking out loans, they're taking out mortgages. But what is the problem if your whole society is based on credit? There's no real money in the economy. So when there's no real money in the economy, that creates this bull market. So it looks like things are really great, but when the rubber meets the road and there's no money to back that line of credit, we're in a heck of a lot of trouble. And so that's what starts happening in the 20s. All of these, furniture companies and all these, the department stores and all that started running credit. So people started buying a crap ton of stuff and like, oh, I can make, $10 payment a month. But then the banks are going to crash and then nobody has money. And then when your whole economy is based on credit and nobody can actually pay for that stuff, then we're in some trouble. So credit sounds awesome, but it's not. Okay. So in the United States, do you have to have credit? Yes. Unfortunately, in the U.S., you can't not have credit, right? So what my personal advice for y'all, or you'll never get it. So it's kind of an issue in the United States. So anyways, so a lot of advertised campaigns start this whole idea, like I said, buy now, pay later. Okay, so the problem is there's no real money in the economy. So we have this idea of the Roaring '20s and prosperity and speakeasies and flappers and parties and Great Gatsby and all that stuff. And that really was a lot of what was going on in the cities. And we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow the Harlem Renaissance, and so this burst of culture that's coming out of New York, out of the African American community. But it's not all roses for a lot of the people, the majority of people in the South. And so the agricultural system in the South is not as strong coming out of the war, because you have these huge bonanza farms that are producing all the food for the war, and then the war is over. And so there's not a whole heck of a lot to support that after the war is over. And so a lot of the people who are still in the South, a lot of minorities, African Americans who have been involved in sharecropping, they can't get out of it. And so there's a lot of poverty in the South with just lower class people, a lot of African Americans, and a lot of the immigrants who moved to the Southwest to work on those farms during the war. Like I said, after it was over, that type of production was not needed. So there's a lot of poverty going on down in the South. So almost every single time the U.S. experiences a conflict or a war or whatever, we always resort back to what? We always kind of come back and clam up and kind of resort back to what? Nativism, nationalism, racism, discrimination. And so what we see happen culturally during the 20s, there's a lot of discrimination, almost a lot of paranoia and resentment for people of Eastern and Northern Europe. So we're good with Western Europe, right? Because, Italians, Germans, Irish, English, those people have been coming here for hundreds of years. But the Eastern Europeans, they caused World War I. They caused this war to start. They pulled the U.S. into the war. So Eastern Europe so the Balkans region where all that conflict was happening. So all these new countries, so we look at that map, so Romanians, Bulgarians, a lot of people, Ukrainian, all of these countries, Latvia, Lithuania, all Polish, all of these Eastern and Northeastern European countries, they're in absolute turmoil because, we looked at that map and pre-war, they're all in one big empire, and then those empires crumble. And so all these new national groups are trying to start their own countries. But when a country is new, you guys know there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of chaos. And so there were a lot of people out of Northern and Eastern Europe trying to flee those areas because there was such turmoil in those regions. And so there was a lot of immigrants trying to come to New York in the Northeast to get out of that Eastern European area, okay? And so the U.S. doesn't like that, okay? So what the U.S. passes is the Emergency Quota Act. Okay, so what is a quota? What's a quota? Exactly. So in this case, we can only accept a certain amount. So like if you work in sales, like you work at Capital Ford, like your quota for the month is you have to sell 20 cars, right? So a quota is a set amount. So in this case, we set a quota on how many immigrants we were going to allow into the United States. So this is 1921, so 3 years after the war is over. So what they do, how they work this, it restricts the number of immigrants admitted from any country annually to 3% of the number of residents in the United States. Okay. So if a German is applying to come to the United States, is trying to immigrate to the U.S., is coming over here, what they're going to do is they're going to look at the German population in the United States, and only 3% of that allows that many people to come over. Does that make sense? Yes, no. Okay. So they're going to look, so say a German person is going to try to immigrate to the United States. They're going to look at the German population in the United States. Okay, so say it's 100 people in the United States. They're only going to allow 3%. So they're only going to allow 3 people to come to the country per year from that country. Does that make sense? So super restricting our amount of immigration. But the thing is, there is a huge population of German Americans. There's a huge population of Irish American and, British American and all these Western European countries that have been immigrating to the United States for hundreds of years. We're good with them. Our discrimination, our racism, and our paranoia is coming from those Eastern European countries because there is not a large population of them here in the United States. And so that effectively shuts down any immigration from Eastern Europe because there's not that large of a population here already. Does that make sense? Okay. So in 1920, the United States received over 800,000 immigrants from Europe. From 1921 to 1922, for those 2 years, we only took a little over 300,000. So significantly reduced our immigrant population in the United States. This only applied to Europe. This did not apply to Latin America or Asia. So we're only restricting that flow of immigrants from Eastern Europe because we resented them and we didn't want those foreigners coming over because we resented them from the war. So an example of this racism and this discrimination against those Eastern European countries was Sacco and Vanzetti. So we'll talk about these guys during our dinner party tomorrow. So these are two Italian immigrants who were living in New York. And so there was just a very typical murder in New York one night. 2 guys were murdered outside their business after they were shutting down for the night, and an eyewitness said that the murderers were 2 Italian-looking men. And then they fled in a Buick. They find the Buick a couple weeks later. They work it down to where they find the guy who they believe to be responsible, and that guy has fled back to Italy. He's gone. He goes back to Italy. But they find these 2 guys, Sacco and Vanzetti, who were just work acquaintances with this guy. And so one of them, I think it was Sacco, owned a gun that was just like the murder weapon, and also owned bullets that was just for that same gun. And so there were hundreds of pieces of evidence to show that these guys did not do this murder. But because the guy had the same gun, both of them are convicted and executed for that crime. 10 years later, the police come out and the mayor comes out and says, we didn't have enough evidence to do that. We did not have enough evidence to convict them. They were wrongfully convicted and wrongfully executed for those crimes. I know, exactly. So, but this is just an example of that paranoia and resentment and discrimination and racism towards these Eastern European countries. Just because they were Italian looking, these guys were convicted for this crime. So just very, 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 very unfortunate. The KKK also amps up a lot during this time period, during the 20s. They really start amping up again. And so not only are they targeting African Americans, but they're targeting Catholics, Jews, all immigrants, and just any un-American looking people. So when we read the Klansman's manual last semester, they talked about white Protestants being superior, right? So anyone who is not a white Protestant, they're going to start targeting. So it's not only targeting African Americans, but all these other groups in the United States. So just a lot of racism throughout the United States. And it had a lot to do with the Red Scare almost even starts during this time period too, because the Soviet Union has formed by 1922. And so this paranoia about communism and socialism is already starting in the U.S. And because a lot of Americans associated the Eastern European countries with communism, that's where a lot of that discrimination is going to come from. So that this Red Scare, which is the fear of communism, we'll talk about it more in Cold War, that's also starting during this time period. And so women, when you think of the 1920s, almost everybody thinks about the flappers and the hair and the short hair and the cigarettes and the fancy clothes and all that stuff. And that's true. The 20s was a super exciting time for women. Women finally get to right to vote. So with that right to vote almost comes this whole new identity for a lot of women. And so those traditional values and those traditional roles for women of just going from your father's house to your husband's house and having kids and staying in that sphere of influence is really starting to shift. And so women started going to college more. So they started moving out and having their own apartments and having girlfriends and going out at night and having fun. And just the role of women and what they believe their role in society is really starting to shift. And so, they started cutting their hair because that was just seen as being really rebellious. They started wearing promiscuous clothes and short skirts, and they started cussing and smoking cigarettes. And so, during the 20s, because of Prohibition, there are a lot of the speakeasies in a lot of big cities, so the secret underground bars or whatever. So, and then Prohibition is not repealed until the 21st Amendment in 33. So, just a whole different role for women during the 20s, just kind of a different identity, very liberating. And that's it.